I'd like to invite Trent up now. Before he speaks, I just want to spend some time just asking him some questions because I feel it's always good and fun to get out to know our speakers a little bit better. Even though most of us might know Trent pretty well, he did spend some time here. But yeah, I believe church is meant to be enjoyed, not endured, so I'm going to have some fun with these questions here.
Hey everyone.
So, Trent, what is the best gift you have ever been given?
Beck.
Oh.
Yep.
Good answer.
Mm-hmm.
Nice one-word answer.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you rather live and why? The beach, the city, forest, or the bush?
The bush.
Why?
Dry Aussie bush.
Dry Aussie bush.
I don't know, it's you know how some things you love them because they're so familiar to you and you've had so many memories in them? That's the bush for me.
Okay,
Yep.
Awesome. How many pillows do you sleep with?
Beck. She's my pillow.
Oh.
No, not really. I don't put her through that. That'd be a nasty experience. One, but it has to be like a
Do you have like
kind of a flattish, you know, I don't like my
Do you have a
necks
particular type of pillow like that you have to sleep with? Like does that go everywhere with you?
No, not really. Like, as long as it's not too fat and hard.
Okay.
I don't understand people who do that.
If you could share a meal with any 4 people, living or dead, who would it be?
Jesus. Beck. Obviously.
We're just fitting Beck into every answer here.
Yeah. Martin Luther.
Martin Luther.
The original.
Yep.
The OG. And I don't know. Probably Judas.
Judas.
I got some questions for that guy.
Nice. What questions?
Why? Yeah. He'd be an interesting one to talk to.
It sounds like, a very interesting dinner table or lunch table, whatever meal you're having.
Uh-huh.
What inspired you to be a pastor?
God, obviously, but I wasn't really inspired to be a pastor. I was kind of just asked by God to be one, and then I kind of had to get used to the idea.
Or how did you feel at first? Was that like, yes, I'll do this, or are you sure?
Uninspired.
Or, no?
Uninspired is literally the word. Yeah, I thought it was going to be boring.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
Really?
It's not.
Awesome.
Like, you know how it is.
I
It's
know.
probably the most exciting.
The next question that follows is, what do you love most about ministry and being a pastor?
I don't know, it's cool. You got purpose. It's probably the greatest purpose you can think of. You get to impact people's relationship with God. Like, what could be greater than that?
Amen.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
It's good.
Convince everyone else.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll pass it over to you. I'm excited to hear what you have to share. And so the stage is all yours. Do you want the pulpit?
Yeah, I might grab this one. Yeah.
Does it on its own?
All right. It's going to make it awkward for the camera people if I go down there, isn't it? Yep. That's fine. I'll stay here. How are you all going? You good? It's been a little while since I've had the pleasure of your company in this setting. You've changed the carpet. Chairs, yeah? Were the chairs and the carpet to match each other? Yep. It works. I like it. So I want to ask you a question. Are preachers allowed to have a bit of fun with their audience sometimes? Can we play a bit of a game here today? Okay, here's the game. With your permission, I'd like to give you a challenge to go home with. I'm going to give you just a Bible verse. That's all it is. 2 Bible verses. And then I'm not going to talk about them at all in the sermon, but they're very, very important, and your job is to go home and find out why, and then message me if you find out why those 2 verses are important and what the connection is with the sermon. The connection isn't really obvious. It might be difficult. It might be easy, depending on whether you're awesome or not. Message me later. You can find me on Facebook if you don't already know me, with what you think is the connection between these 2 Bible verses and the message today. Does that sound fun? All right. So the 2 Bible verses, write these down. It's Luke chapter 11, And the verses are verse 9 and then verse 15. Luke 11, verses 9 and verse 15. So that's the challenge. That's the game. Go home, try to work out what the connection is between those two verses and our message here today. And with that, let's get into our sermon. Do you know that there are very, very few people who could make the claim to be the father or mother of an entire nation? Very, very few people. Less people that are actually still alive. There's one person who can claim to be the father of a great nation. Let me tell you a little bit about it. This person is responsible for the introduction of a nation that was monotheistic in an ancient world that was always polytheistic. This man was also responsible for a nation whose God took down the Egyptians, which were the ancient world's equivalent of the United States. Good luck taking them down, yeah? Took them down. This guy is also responsible for introducing a nation who brought the Son of God and the Saviour of the world into existence, Jesus. A nation that would also foster, at the beginning, a belief in Jesus called Christianity, which would then become the greatest force of morality in the world. He's also the father of this nation and of this belief system called Christianity, which would then, after being derailed for several hundred years in a period we called the Dark Ages by a false religion, would then re-emerge as the basis for something we call the Renaissance, which would also usher in the technological revolutions that have made our life more prosperous, more long, and of a higher quality than ever before. None of all of this miraculous stuff around us in this world today would have happened, I would argue, without this one man and the nation that he birthed into existence. I'm not doing the over-exaggeration thing here for effect. I literally believe that that is the result of one man. Guess what his name was? Deceiver. It's like, really? The guy who brought all of that into existence, his name was Deceiver? Yeah, that's true. His name was Jacob. Jacob means deceiver, indirectly. Jacob literally means, in Hebrew, he who grasps at the heel. But it became sort of like, I think, an idiom in the Hebrew language, where someone would say something like, oh, don't trust him, he grabs at the heel. He's not just going to take your donkey, he's going to find a way to get your house as well through his deception. So Jacob, he who grabs at the heel, the one who can't be trusted, the deceiver. We should probably get into his story, huh? Let's do it. There's about 5 parts to his story. First part, twin birth. Rebecca is married to Isaac. She falls pregnant with twins. When these two come out, it's actually one comes out before the other. It's Esau. Now, Esau, he's the one that is the hairy one. Like right from a baby, he's described as the hairy one, and he's very, very red. He wasn't embarrassed. It's just the pigmentation of his skin. Very red. Really weird for twins to be so different like this, right? So Esau comes out first with all the hair and all the redness, but there's someone behind him in the womb still who's reaching out and has grabbed his heel. This is where the whole name comes from. He's grabbed his heel as if to say, no, I am not going to let you become the first. Now, this is really important in Hebrew culture because the Hebrews had something called the birthright. The birthright. It's kind of like the birth wrong, but not really. So the birthright is if you are born first in your family and you're a male, then you are called to take on the responsibility of leadership and the position of judicial authority in your family once your father passes away. You're the boss. That's the birthright. Really, really important when it comes to Jacob and Esau, because they're pretty much born at the same time. So it's like, man, who really deserves this thing? They kind of both do, but we can't just give it to both, because then there's going to be war between the family, division, not good. So anyway, they grow up, these two boys. Esau is known as the hunter. He's like the wild kid. He's out in the bush, he's hunting things, he's bringing them home and he's eating them. Jacob, on the other hand, it's like polar opposites, guys, seriously. Jacob is described in Genesis as the dweller of tents. He's like the indoor kid, right? He's just in there with his Xbox all day. He's like, yeah, I'm going to level up. It's going to be good. He's like the soft brother. He loves to cook. He's a foodie. And he's always in there like cooking up some little thing. His hands are soft. Esau's are hard. And Esau is a hairy man. Jacob is kind of like, probably like me. There's not much there. So anyway, and I'm not associating myself with Jacob in any way, by the way. Now, something interesting happens one day. Esau is returning from a hunt, but it seems like he didn't really catch anything. He didn't get anything. And he is exhausted and he is hungry. He comes into the tent, just bursts in there. He's like, oh, I'm Esau, I'm like, I'm hungry. And Jacob's doing his little foodie thing. He's like, oh, Esau, bro, I cooked up a broth. I don't think he was Kiwi, sorry, that's bad. I can't do a Hebrew accent. But they're doing their usual thing here. And so Esau says to Jacob, the logical thing, give me some of that food, man. Like, I'm starving. And here's where Jacob's whole deceiver thing comes up for the first time in their story. He says to Esau, he's like, bro, this soup's real good. It's so good that it's going to cost you everything. I want your birthright in exchange for this soup. You're not getting a drop of this unless I get the birthright. Remember the birthright, yeah? It is the highest position of authority in the family, and if you have that, you're in charge once dad's gone. Would you give that up for a bowl of soup? Not if you take it seriously. Esau does. He's like, I don't want the birthright. Yeah, give me that soup. You can have the birthright. I didn't want it anyway. Now, I used to look at this story, and I always thought that Jacob was kind of like the dodgy dude. But I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I actually think it was Esau. What sort of man, taking responsibility for the entire family, says, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to help the widows in our family out. I don't want to help our sisters out if they never get married to another guy. I don't want a responsibility. Like, who does that? Seriously. I don't know what you think, but I reckon Esau is at fault just as much, or if not more, than Jacob in this whole strange exchange of birthright. By the way, this never happens. This whole birthright thing very rarely happens in Hebrew culture. And this is the only instance that I'm aware of where someone gives up their birthright voluntarily. In other instances, it's done by an external force. Anyway, so that's the whole story of Jacob deceiving Esau for the birthright. So now Jacob is in charge. He's the guy that is like the big brother of the family, even though he came second. Really interesting. The next story we find in the Bible takes it to a whole new level. Rebecca. Remember Rebecca and Isaac? Rebecca was chosen by God to be like this beautiful, amazing wife for Isaac, and she's just the prophesied bride. Well, then she comes along and she looks a bit different at this point in history. She comes to Jacob one day and says, hey, Jacob, got an idea. We're going to deceive your father into giving you the blessing. Now, the blessing, this is another thing. It's kind of similar to the birthright, but different. It was customary for a father in Hebrew culture to, on his deathbed before he passed away, bless the firstborn son, asking God to give him material abundance so that he could care for the extended family, and to make his brothers come under his authority so that peace and order would be preserved in the clan as long as possible. So, the blessing was also this confirmation thing, that the father was giving you twice as much of his inheritance than any other sibling in the family. You get twice as much if you get the blessing, and the blessing usually goes to the firstborn son. Now, you can see why. If you have the responsibility over the whole family, and especially over taking care of those that are down and out, the unmarried sisters and the widows, you're going to need some resources, right? And so it makes sense that you should get double the inheritance. With responsibility comes reward or resource. So anyway, that's the whole blessing thing. And so Isaac is supposed to be giving the blessing to the firstborn son, even though Esau has abdicated the responsibility of being the kid with the birthright, the kid with the responsibility. He's still going to get the blessing because that's just how it's all done, right? Now, it's interesting to note that the blessing is this system that God incorporated into the laws of Deuteronomy, but God was often happy to break his own rule here. The Old Testament is full of examples of God choosing the younger brothers over older ones. You think about it. We've got Isaac over Ishmael. Now that's a bit of a complex one there, but let's go on to Judah. Judah is chosen over his 3 older brothers to be the leader of the family and the ancestor of the royal line of King David and then of Jesus. All right? So Judah is chosen before them. And then you've got David, chosen over seven of his older brothers as the king. Never happened. Not humanly speaking. But God would sometimes override his own rule because the principle of the rule was more important than the rule itself. And that is something that we need to learn for ourselves as well. Let's not be too black and white about things, yeah? We can see that many times God has a principle underneath a rule, and sometimes the principle will override the rule, as it happens here. So, God's birthright blessing structure is important, but not all important. And what happens is that in this story here, Rebekah conspires with Jacob to steal that whole blessing, the double inheritance, from the father, from Isaac. Isaac at this point is blind, he's old, he is frail. His mental capacity is not complete. And so it's not going to be all that hard, yeah? So here's what they do. Rebecca's like, oh, well, your dad's blind, so he's not going to see you, but he's going to be able to feel you. And you're not very hairy, dude. Like, Jacob, you're kind of lacking in that department. You're not really a brawny dude. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get some animal skins with a lot of hair on them, and we're going to wrap them like around your arms, like that. And when your father goes out to grasp your arms, he's going to feel like, yeah, this is definitely Esau. There's way too much hair to be Jacob. And then he'll give you the blessing, assuming you are Esau rather than Jacob. Anyway, did it work? Yeah, it worked. It worked very well. Isaac was slightly skeptical. He's like, is it really you, Esau? And he's like, yes, it's me. Yeah. And he deceives his dad. Dad gives a blessing, double inheritance, cannot be taken back. It's as good as sealed with blood. But then Esau returns. What are you going to do if you're Esau? Man, you're going to be angry. Like, you're a warrior. You can do some damage, and you can correct this. If you kill Jacob, who does the blessing go to? You're the only other brother. Blessing's got to go somewhere. Someone's got to inherit it. And you'll get 3 times as much, yeah? Because you'll not just get the double blessing, but you'll also get Jacob's blessing. So Esau, well, we don't know exactly what he was planning to do. But Rebekah, for sure, thought that Esau was coming to kill. And so she yells at Jacob. She's like, Jacob, run for your life. Get out. Your brother's coming home. He is not going to look on this favorably. So he does it. Jacob, little obedient boy, mama's boy, softy. He's like, yes, mum. He runs for his life. I don't know if I'm characterizing him correctly, by the way. You can interpret it how you wish, but this is how it goes in my mind. So Jacob runs. He then he sort of enters the next part of the story. He goes to his uncle's house. And it seems like he's trying to rebuild his life here. So he goes to his uncle's house. He meets his uncle's daughters. These were different times, remember? And he looks at one of them and he goes, ooh. Looks at the other one and goes, ooh. Like, One is, the Bible describes it as like Rachel had a sparkle in her eye, but Leah was like dull sort of thing, like no sparkle. And that's kind of how it goes for Jacob. He's like, yeah, I want the pretty one. And so he works for 7 years, cuts a deal. The reason he was working, by the way, was kind of like an insurance policy. God set up a system in Hebrew culture where if you wanted to marry a woman, you needed to pay a price to her father. And her father was supposed to keep that price, those resources, whether they were animals or whatever it might have been, kind of as a separate account, like an insurance policy. It was an insurance policy against the life of the husband. And so if I was going to marry Rebecca, my wife, Beck, the idea was that I would give her father maybe 30 grand, or the equivalent in animals, so that if I happened to die, she would be taken care of with those resources after I passed away, at least for a time. So it's like a life insurance policy. Jacob does that. He does it for 7 years. He earns the right to marry Rachel. 7 years goes, wedding night, there's a tent, it's really dark. Jacob wakes up the following morning and he sees dullness instead of sparkles. He's like, How would you feel? Like, let's just pause here for a moment. How would you, gentlemen in the room, feel if you woke up the following morning and it was not the woman that you expected? I mean, this stuff you can't make this stuff up, yeah? Anyway, so Jacob approaches Laban and he says to Laban, look, mate, this is not right what you've done here. And Laban stops him. He stops him and he says to him, Jacob, I don't understand what you're saying, mate. In my culture, we do not let the younger go before the older. All right, so Rachel, the hot one, she was the younger sister. Leah was the older one. In their culture, the older one needed to be married before the younger one could be married off. So Laban calls him out. He says, look, mate, we don't let the younger go before the older. What's he really saying there to Jacob? He's saying, look, mate, I know your sins. You've got nothing on me. I know what you've taken from your older brother. I'm just doing what you're doing, man. Your morality is my morality. And so Jacob doesn't seem to have a retort to that. He's just like, yeah, fair enough. And he goes back and he works another 7 years. Gets the pretty one, Rachel, marries her, and it's not too much longer after that, I think, that Jacob decides to head off with what he's gained and to start his nation. You've got to remember that in the background of Jacob's mind here, he is now the custodian of the promise that God made to Abraham. To Abram, actually, wasn't it? Before Abraham was Abraham, he was Abram, and God made a promise to Abram. What was that promise? You will become a great nation. So in the back of Jacob's mind this whole time is, I've got the birthright, I've got the blessing, I am God's man, and I need to go forth, and I am going to start this nation and be the guy who takes God's promise and brings it into life. So, he does that. He leaves Laban, takes his now 4 wives, by the way. There was another 2 in Jacob. Seriously. No wonder his kids were screwed up. Honestly. You don't marry 4 different women and then... People in the Bible are complicated. So he goes off with his now 4 wives. He's got 11 sons, plus daughters, assumedly, as well. And he takes off with a bunch of Laban's animals as well. Now, that was kind of deceptive once again, but Laban kind of did some dodgy things as well. This is one of those stories where everyone is at fault in some way. No one's perfect here. So he takes off with these animals that he's stolen, and Laban finds him on the way. They have a bit of an altercation. We don't have time to get into that because we are now going into this story that I want to focus on before we wrap this whole thing into a neat package, which is the night before Jacob has to encounter Esau. Now, it's been decades at this point. Remember that in the Bible, sometimes one story on one page is decades separated from a story on the following page. This is one of those moments. Jacob goes off. He's in the wilderness now. He's got his family with him, the 11 kids, 4 wives, whole bunch of animals, servants, other people with him. And he's going to find the land that he's going to settle in and create that nation in. But then a scout comes back to him. And the scout says, "Hey, Jacob, this isn't good news. Your brother Esau is coming. And he's got 400 strong men with him, warriors." Jacob freaks out at this news. He's like, "What the heck are we going to do? I don't have 400 strong men. I am dead if my brother wants me dead." And so he starts to do a whole bunch of contingencies. He's sending people over here, sending resources there, sending animals ahead to Esau and saying, "Oh, Esau, this is a gift from your servant Jacob," trying to do the whole, "I'm small, I'm wimpy, like, don't hurt me" kind of thing. And then we pick the story up and we'll actually read this part from the Bible. It's Genesis 32 from verse 22 onwards. It says, "That night," this is after he's started to do all the shuffling of resources and people, "that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left there alone. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, 'Let me go, for it's daybreak.' But Jacob replied, 'I will not let you go.'" Remember the whole grasping at the heel thing? This is happening again. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." What's the blessing? He needs resources in order to carry out the plan that God has for him, his destiny. "Unless you bless me." The man asked, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Remember what Jacob means? Deceiver. He who grabs at the heel, can't be trusted. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, will no longer be deceiver, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Okay, so what is this that we've just read? Have you read this before and been puzzled? I've read this heaps of times, and it wasn't until very recently that I actually got it. I was just like, what? Like, why does God wrestle with him for like hours through the night? And what's this whole what is this thing? Very strange here, very strange. So let's start with the basics that we have been given from this text. Either a man or an angel or maybe even God has come to Jacob in the night and just started a fearsome wrestling match with him. And the word wrestle there, by the way, in the Hebrew, it literally means to get dusty. Like the image in the Hebrew is sort of like 2 guys that are just going at it so hard and with such velocity that dust is just flying up in the air around them. And it also has connotations of like a fight to the death. So when you read this, it's like, whoa, Jacob might die. That's what we know about that part. Now, one thing we can learn from this is that, perhaps in life, God is not going to be just the friendly little, oh, please do the right thing, oh, it'd be good if you grew up and moved out of the house sort of thing. Sometimes God is going to push you into situations in order to teach you something. And that's what I think is what is happening here. So then something strange happens. It appears that the God-man who Jacob is wrestling with realizes that he cannot win. Now stop there for a moment. God can't win a simple wrestling match with a little soft tent dweller who loves his food? Seriously. This is very, very strange. And it seems that at the point that Jacob's hip is put out of joint, that's when he wakes up and he realizes this is not just some random guy in the darkness that I'm wrestling with. This guy's supernatural. He just put my hip out just by touching it. Nah, this must be God. And so he goes on with this whole obsession thing about the blessing then, right? He's obsessed with the blessing and the birthright for some reason. It's been all the time since he was a baby, grabbing at his brother's heel to pull him back in so that he could get the birthright. And he's doing it again. This is highlighted for a reason. So he just holds on. He's like, no, I will not let you go unless you bless me. I will not let go of my destiny as the father of this nation that you have called me into being. My brother Esau wasn't capable and or willing to take the responsibility that was required. So I stepped up and I fought hard for this nation. I know that the promise that was made to my grandfather Abram is also a promise that now applies to me as the birthright holder. And I am asking you and calling on you and pleading with you and begging you now to bless me so that I can do what you've called me to do here, God. And I reckon that's pretty cool. There's a lot of stuff that you can look at with Jacob and you go, oh man, what a dodgy guy. But this is the part that I admire deeply about him. He will not let God go because he knows that he has a destiny to fulfill. And he knows that this God who is wrestling with him, he's confused about the whole wrestle thing, clearly. He's like, what? Why are you trying to kill me? What's going on here? And this is where I'm interested in sharing with you something about Luther. Luther was aware of this. You guys know Martin Luther, the guy that I mentioned before. Great reformer, like 1600s odd. Luther was aware of this thing in German culture where a parent would sometimes steal something from their child, and they would want their child to grab it back from them and force it out of their hand and wrestle it back. It was like they were teaching disobedience in their children, but with a higher reason. And so, you do this as a German parent, and you go, I'm taking that. And then you want your child to take it back, because if they take it back, they learn the value of that thing and they grow up to appreciate stuff and know that it's not going to be an easy thing in life. You're going to have to fight for your destiny. You're going to have to fight for the things that you need to do what you've been called to do. So this is like a German parent thing that Luther was aware of. And he makes a comment about that in mentioning similar things that we're talking about here today. And I think that is what God was doing with this whole wrestle match. He's coming along as an adversary, maybe even an enemy to Jacob, to test whether Jacob truly believes that God is good. And Jacob proves that he does believe that God is good, because he's like, you're God? You're the one that's wrestling me? Okay, I don't care what I'm seeing here in this whole wrestle match thing where you're trying to hurt me and you're putting my hip out of socket. I see something in you and I know that you are good. And it's that moment where he holds on to God, where God goes, all right, good job, son. You've learnt the lesson. Yes, I am good, and I'm going to show you how good I am by blessing you. And I'm going to promise you huge abundance so that you can go forward and fulfill that mission that you've been called to. So it worked. Now the next morning, the sun has already been rising as they're having this final little chat. And that's where this chapter of Jacob's story kind of finishes. That morning, as the sun is rising on the horizon, Jacob has now limped to where his wives and all the other things are, and he is absolutely exhausted from an all-night wrestling match. He's in pain. He is weaker than ever. And now Esau, with his 400 strong men, is stronger than ever. God has injured Jacob's hip. He's very much aware of his vulnerability. And I think God has done this partly as well to disable any sense of self-dependence in Jacob. He is arguably about to fight the most difficult battle of his life. And yet he's weaker and less competent than ever to do so. You ever feel like that? You ever been like that before? Where you're like, oh man, this thing is way too big for me. Where do you go when you're like that? Well, smart people go to God. The unfortunate don't. And Jacob seems to have done that. He has Esau approach him, and as Esau approaches him, he doesn't even try to fight. He doesn't even brace himself like, all right, Esau, if you want me, you're going to have to... He's just like... And he surrenders himself into God's hands and sort of has this come what may attitude, which is probably not a bad way to be, because then God can take over, yeah? So anyway, God does come through. The story ends well. The story ends really well. These brothers who have been separated for decades, and separated not just by time, but they've been separated by their enmity toward each other, Esau just comes to him and he says, bro, get up. Give me a hug, man. Like, you don't have to worry about any of that. I've forgiven you. And they have this like long brotherly hug. There's tears everywhere. And Jacob's like, I'm sorry, man. I'm really sorry. And Esau's like, oh, no worries, man. And that's kind of how that chapter ends. It's quite miraculous that Jacob isn't killed by his brother. Forgiveness is probably one of the most difficult things you can do. And yet Esau does it. I suspect that there's a side of Esau's story that would be longer than the side of Jacob's story that we know, but we don't have that written down. I want to know what happened with Esau. How do you get to a point where you forgive the brother that took everything from you? There's probably a lesson in that one for us as well. So that's kind of where the story finishes there. There's an interesting sort of chapter where Joseph goes out and he becomes the second most powerful man in the world, the known world, Prime Minister of Egypt. You got to be proud if you're Jacob at that point. You know, the other 11 sons are kind of dodgy, but at least one of them kind of worked out. Are there any parents in the room and you're like, yeah, don't put your hand up, your kids are here. But then, you know, later on, Jacob, on his deathbed, he does this whole blessing thing for his grandchildren and his children. And I reckon that he must have been quite proud of what he'd built. At that point, his sons and their families were some of the most wealthy landowners in Egypt. Remember how the whole exchange thing happened with the grain and all that? Jacob's sons were now some of the richest landowners in Egypt, the superpower of the then known world. And he's sitting there on his deathbed blessing these sons and calling on God to bless them so that they can continue to fulfill the destiny that was also his. Pretty cool story, yeah? There's ups and downs in that. There's pieces of that we can take for our own lives. I don't have one of those usual end of the sermon calls like, everyone go and be like Jacob. Don't do that, by the way. Be like maybe 1/100th of what Jacob was. So I don't have anything like that. But I do want to remind you of the game that we started at the start. Luke chapter 11 and verses 9 and 15. If you want to know what this story is really about, compare it with those two verses and message me later if you work it out. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for preserving this story over the last several thousand years for us. Help us to learn how you operate, what sort of person you are, and how you work in our lives. Help us to dig deeper when we're confused about you, to try to work out what you're actually doing. And Lord, I want to take a moment to just pray a blessing on everyone here. That to the extent that they follow your call in their lives, that you will bless them. You'll bless their families, their children, their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren, so that they too may be like mini Jacobs and create many nations of people that will take your good news into this world. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
The Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the Israelites. Say to them, the Lord bless you, the Lord keep you, Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace." God blesses people in countless ways: spiritual, mental, emotional, material, and physical. But here, in these words, God is blessing his people with words. And can you imagine, this is like a parent saying blessings on their children with kind words, but it's so much more than that. God used words to speak the world into existence. And now can you imagine that God is using those same words to say these blessings on you? Yes, you. Let that sink in for a moment. So what I want you to do now is close your eyes for a moment and imagine God's face shining upon you. What does that feel like? To have the Creator shine his face towards you with love in his eyes, whispering sweet blessings to you. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace.
If we could all please stand for the final song.
Keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you, and 1,000 generations, as your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you, and behind you, and beside you, all around you, and within you. He is with you, he is with you, in the morning, in the evening, in your coming, and your going, in your weeping, and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 he is for you. Amen. 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 The Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace.
Happy Sabbath, everyone.
I just want to thank you for the invite to speak with you today. And I've actually got to run, so I didn't want to be like the awkward preacher who just like runs and they're like, oh, where'd that dude go? I've got to go to a Pathfinder event for my church. But I just wanted to say, God bless you as a church. I love what you're doing with the place. Keep on doing it. I love this whole second service thing. There's so many young people here and it's just got a great spiritual, God-centered vibe. So bless you as you continue to do that. And look forward to catching up with you another time.